Phone check. 1, 2. The microphone check. 1, 2, 1, 2. The microphone check. I got my headphones tuned between two different AM stations, and my briefcase is full of declassified information. Declassified. Declassified.
Good evening and welcome to News from Neptune for the 35th week of 2014. For more than 20 years, this program has been a spontaneous and unrehearsed discussion on the news of the week and its coverage by the media, first on a so-called community radio station, and when censored and locked out of there, welcomed, I'm happy to say, by the good folks at Urbana Public Television. I'm Carl Estabrook. My discussants tonight are David Green and Ron Szoke. Our program's name, News from Neptune, was chosen to honor Noam Chomsky, who's been talking sense about American politics for more than twice the quarter century we've been on the air. Chomsky has said that in the American media, either repeat the same conventional doctrines everybody is saying, or else you say something true and it will sound like it's from Neptune. Our format is to take turns suggesting stories that have been ignored or misreported, occasionally even innocently, in the media, and then having our colleagues comment on them. Previous programs are archived on YouTube and posted to the Facebook page for News from Neptune, where you'll also find comments from viewers, not all unadulterated praise, and some answers from us. I can be reached at carl@newsfromneptune.com, and I'm happy to receive your comments. It's August 29th. On this day in 1756, Frederick II of Prussia, some called him the Great, his friend Voltaire perhaps, Frederick II of Prussia invaded Saxony, beginning the 7 Years' War. This has been described by some as the First World War. The organized murder was not limited to Europe, but included North America and South Asia as well. And it followed the diplomatic revolution of 1756, the reversal of long-standing alliances in Europe between the War of the Austrian Succession and the 7 Years' War itself, which lasted, surprisingly, from 1756 to 1763. The shift, the diplomatic revolution, has also been described as the great change of partners in 18th century Europe. The essence of the revolution was that Britain and Austria, opposing France and Prussia, became France and Austria, opposing Britain and Prussia. As a result of the diplomatic revolution, Britain and Prussia faced Austria, France, and Russia. Despite the reversal of alliances, the basic antagonisms remain: Prussia versus Austria and Britain versus France. When the tensions erupted into the 7 Years' War, beginning on this day in 1756, the diplomatic revolution was seen as a principal besetting cause. Britain emerged from the 7 Years' War as the world's leading colonial power, having gained a number of new territories at the Treaty of Paris in 1763 and establishing itself as the world's preeminent naval power. So British hegemony was the outcome of that struggle. It was to face some difficulties in North America and Europe in the next generation. I want to suggest tonight to my colleagues that we may be on the verge of a diplomatic revolution in 2014 involving the world's leading neocolonial power, now no longer Britain, but the United States. But I'll wait to lay out my fantasy on this matter until my colleagues have had a chance to mention their stories for the day. But I do want to begin with a poem which has occurred to me as I was thinking about diplomatic revolutions. Bertolt Brecht's Fragen an das Lesen der Arbeiter. And I will spare you my German, which has been known to bring strong men to tears. But I will read you the translation of Brecht's poem, Questions from a Worker Who Reads. Who built Thebes of the 7 gates? In the books you will read the names of kings. Did the kings haul up the lumps of rock? And Babylon, many times demolished, who raised it up so many times? In what houses of gold glittering Lima did its builders live? Where, the evening that the Great Wall of China was finished, did the masons go? Great Rome is full of triumphal arches. Who raised them up? Over whom did the Caesars triumph? Had Byzantium, much praised in song, only palaces for its inhabitants? Even in fabled Atlantis, the night that the ocean engulfed it, the drowning still cried out for their slaves. The young Alexander conquered India. Was he alone? Caesar defeated the Gauls. Did he not even have a cook with him? Philip of Spain wept when his armada went down. Was he the only one to weep? Every page, Frederick II won the 7 Years' War. Who else won it? Every page a victory. Who cooked the feast for the victors? Every 10 years a great man. Who paid the bill? So many reports, so many questions. You're watching News from Neptune, a diplomatic revolution edition, and we'll start with reports and questions from Ron Szoke.
Yes. Is it your understanding that the 7 Years' War appeared in the North American version as the French and Indian War?
Right.
Yeah.
Yep.
Mm-hmm. Some have called that the First World War.
Yep.
Because it involved most of the planet.
Exactly.
Insofar as it was known at the time.
That's true.
So,
of course, we have other candidates for the First World War, before and after, but
right.
yeah, it's in the running.
Yeah, great. Perhaps I should start with this piece that appeared recently. I don't have the exact source here. It's a year old, actually. A report on a survey that was carried out by American voters saying 3 in 10 registered American voters believe an armed rebellion might be necessary in the next few years, according to results of a staggering poll released by Fairleigh Dickinson University, their Public Mind project. The survey, aimed at measuring public attitudes toward gun issues, found that 29% of Americans agree with the statement, in the next few years, an armed revolution might be necessary in order to protect our liberties. An additional 5% were unsure. 18% of Democrats said an armed revolt might be necessary, as compared with 27% of independents and 44% of Republicans. Support levels were similar among males and females, but higher among less educated voters. The poll also found that 25% of voters believe that the American public is being lied to about the Sandy Hook Elementary School shooting by people seeking to promote a political agenda. And additional 11% said they weren't sure. So this was at the time of the maximum discussion of gun control and so on. And much was being said in the right-wing press about the gun grabbers in the federal government and how they were coming to take your guns away. There's always been an undercurrent of this, as I can see, in American life. It's the goddamn government that is the cause of all of our problems and so on. And,
I certainly agree with that.
Yeah. I think it's being exaggerated, but anyway.
But the question is, I mean, when you ask people whether they think an armed revolution will be necessary, and there's certainly plenty of people on the left who might not support violence, a violent overthrow of the government, who would much prefer peaceful means, but still many of us who might call ourselves realists on the left might accede to the notion that it would only be violence that could challenge the status quo. So not that I would never support a violent strategy, but still, I mean, I guess when you bring that topic up, I'm thinking about left-right alliances, about realignment of, yes, you have conspiracy theorists on the right, and maybe some on the left, but you have a lot of people that are dissatisfied enough who know what's going on to want to feel like the government needs to be overthrown one way or the other in its current form.
Yeah. Well, there are a couple of approaches to that, I think. One is my conviction that the surveillance processes of the government are so great that there's going to be very little chance of something like that getting started.
That's a very interesting point, Ron.
Yeah.
I mean, particularly because I think that there is a mood within the American government right now, and I mean the Obama administration, the Department of Homeland Security, the Defense Department, the Justice Department, and the Congress and the equivalent staffs. There is a real fear amongst these people at the moment that a severe economic downturn, which is not indeed unlikely, I mean, given the fact that we're in the midst of a general severe economic downturn for the last 5 years, could produce a social unrest in substantial form in this country,
Yes.
and that they're moving towards it, everything from the militarization of the police that we've been talking about recently to various and sundry plans for Pentagon involvement in domestic control, in spite of the posse comitatus tradition that grew out of the Civil War. Right. So, I mean, I think that the government shares that fear of the people in the survey that you're talking about, that such a thing may be, and they're ready for it.
Another aspect of this is the sophistication of the anti-personnel weapons that are at the disposal of local authorities now, as we saw in the discussion concerning Ferguson, Missouri.
Right.
A lot of police departments now have not only armored trucks, but tanks and drones and heavy weapons. And can a popular uprising succeed against this kind of thing?
Right here in River City, we've got an MRAP.
Yep.
There's this interesting article this week by Brian Dolinar that's appeared on the web about Champaign County's favorite tank and its usage.
Yeah.
And look, I mean, the general circumstance seems to me clear, and I think at least the government is worried that they haven't got a lock on it.
Yeah.
We have to go back, I think, maybe to what Gandhi said. And even though I think I've read everything that Norman Finkelstein has written, except for his book about Gandhi. So I have to get around to doing that,
Yes.
and I will report back to you on that.
Put
But
that on the list.
the sense I get from, and it can be read, just a copy ordered over the internet to read on your laptop from OR Books. But I think he stressed the idea that, and Gandhi stressed the idea, I don't think Finkelstein is coming up with anything different, that people need to be willing to face their fears. There has to be enough of them. Some of them need to understand that they're going to die in a nonviolent action. And the question is how one organizes that and how one carries that out in a way that's actually effective, and what are the historical circumstances that might dictate that might guarantee or make more likely the success of such a thing, that such loss of life will result in the kind of change that happened in India in the 1940s.
Yeah.
It's a point that Chomsky frequently makes, too, that American history from the beginning has been characterized by fearfulness of an unusual sort, and that there are good reasons for it. That America, at its foundation, by America I mean the European polities in North America, that Europeans in North America had good reason to fear Native Americans and Native Africans who had been brought to North America. They were killing one and enslaving the other. And so fear as a motive for American political reflection, such as your survey turns up, Ron, it's something that goes back a long way and doesn't go away, and it's good reason for it.
Yeah. Well, what has happened to Clive Bundy and his crew in, where is it, Nevada? Haven't heard anything about them recently, and are they still engaging in their rebellion? They stood up to the feds and threatened them with guns, and nothing happened. The feds backed down. So does that tell you anything?
Legal case involving Bundy's son, was that it? I forget now.
Yeah.
But,
Haven't followed it yet.
Well, one of his granddaughters took a pocket knife to school, and she was disciplined
I
for
see.
that, and so now they're rebelling against that.
How many bullets hit her?
Yeah, so it's interesting phenomenon. I'm not sure how widespread this is, but if you look at the right-wing press, as I do regularly, there's a good deal of this boiling away under the surface, I think, or smoldering there, shall we say. And how serious it will become, I don't know. I think the mass of the population is sufficiently narcotized that this is not going to get very far among middle-class, white-collar people who are worried about their careers and so on.
I'm really asking this question in a naive way because I don't follow the right-wing press that closely, and I don't know.
How can you not?
I mean, I sort of do, but I sort of like try to avoid.
It's all around you.
Reading more than a headline.
Any press you follow is.
Yeah, but how are we to understand what's called extremism in this country in the midst of the powers that be? Yeah. What role does extremism play? Does what's labeled as extremism by quote unquote respectable people, what role does that play in their maintaining their own power? I mean, at what point? Yeah. I mean, it seems like to me that people like Rush Limbaugh, Bill O'Reilly, and worse, serve a certain role in the propaganda system as a whole. And so I'm just wondering how is it that they're needed by the system to keep the system working in the way that it does?
Thesis on latent function of these people. Right. And the demand for civility. But remember that one? Incivility.
That's come up around town, hasn't it?
Yes, all the time. Yes.
Notions like extremism, the other isms that we're hearing in political discourse these days, isolationism, for example, things like this, remarkably ideologized statements that are so much a part of political advertising that they've lost all analytic use. I mean, what does it mean finally to talk about extremism in America?
Yeah.
So someone who's willing to use a gun? Well, if that's true, that's where we're talking about the police forces again, aren't we? Yeah. So it's it's not a very healthy, I think, way of discussing the matter. On most of these questions, I tend to be a traditional Catholic and believe in the just war principles, that the Pope was mentioning just the other day. And under just war principles in contemporary society, it seems to me you could make an argument that there is a case for no war except the class war. Just war circumstances simply don't obtain. It becomes a null set.
Yeah. I wanted to move on eventually to a discussion of some events of the past week at the great university down the street and get your
Another
opinions.
ideologized description, right?
Right. And their constant babble about excellence. But the thing I noticed in my years around various universities is that more fine academic minds can be changed in 10 minutes by an offer to grant or withhold a large sum of money that can be changed in 10 years of the most patient and meritorious argumentation.
How odd. We don't know any other people like this, just university folks, right?
Yeah, right. And so it started to come out about who the people were who contacted the chancellor when they got wind of some of the things that Professor Salata were saying online. And we're going to get lots of hot and heavy denials, I'm sure. But what role do you think that had? She started hearing from various past and potential contributors to the foundation, the fundraising arm of the university, and it had the outcome that we all know about.
I'm sure it made no difference at all. I mean, she was behaving just the way she normally. And I almost mean that in the sense that the job that the Chancellor of the University of Illinois is in place to do is a job that takes that seriously as a matter of course, and that these sorts of decisions, ideological tests for faculty and so forth, suppression of student dissent, these things just come with the job. They're just taken for granted. What's really interesting about this one is that it surfaced, that it broke cover. It means the system is not working very well to repress stuff like this. The mere fact that this is on the agenda, that it's being discussed across the country in university common rooms, that departments of the University of Illinois are voting no confidence in their chancellor. This is new. This is worthwhile, and this seems to me to be, in fact, a good thing, capital G, capital T. We have generations, literally, of experience with American universities where ideological tests were hypocritically applied to faculty and students alike. Here's one that seems to have broken cover. You know, we can only be pleased with that.
Yeah. Well, I wanted to raise then the question of the corporate university and whether what we're seeing here is a manifestation of what happens there, and when the ideology of the value neutrality of the corporate university
What's that again?
breaks down. The value neutrality is part of the ideology, it seems, of the corporate university or corporate business, really.
Sort of like a
anything.
unicorn. Or
they just respond to the heaviest pressure at the moment. And there's an interesting book I've come across about this, Managerialism, the Emergence of a New Ideology, which this author claims is a kind of ideology midway between, in some respects, capitalism and socialism. It professes to be ideology value-free and neutral with respect to all of the other ideologies current in the society. And how much of a pose is this, a deception? I think we're seeing that here, where the values really are. I've mentioned in here before the motto of the University of Illinois is supposedly learning and labor, but a more appropriate motto might be, we'll do anything for money. And do you have any comments on that?
Yeah, I mean, I'll take up I'll take your softball down the middle of the plate.
Yeah, exactly. Right, Chuck.
And about managerialism.
It's one of your toughest ones.
I mean, Ron, I know, Ron, you're not, you're not doing anything real. You don't intend to do anything real, academically convoluted here. I mean, managerialism was the ideology of American corporations before and after World War II, and since, and for the period that we talk about as the golden era from 1945 to 75 or so, managerialism was thought to be a kind of an alliance between the managers and the workers, insofar as the workers would benefit, at least in terms of wealth or pay, relative to their gains in productivity. But managerialism, and so managerialism was extolled as kind of the end of history in a certain sense, that this was perfection that was going to be achieved by these managerial techniques. The class warfare would be over, the workers would be happy, and capitalism would do fine, but it would operate within limits. Well, that's all been blown apart since 1975 or so, during what we call this neoliberal era. And a couple of less well-known or less commented upon economists who've also written a whole book about this, analyzing this process. There's been a couple of French economists. French economists seem to be all the rage these days.
Right.
There's a couple
Except
that,
in France.
there's a couple that are maybe less well known than Thomas Piketty, named Dumenil and Levy, Dumenil, with an accent somewhere in there, and Levy, Levy, and they've written a lot about managerial capitalism from a Marxist perspective, and how this alliance, how what seemed to be an alliance between managers and workers for 30 years or so has in fact turned out to be an alliance between managers and capitalists, and this also relates very much to the role that these managers have played in the financialization of our system. The managers now are the ones dealing with the money. They're not so much the ones operating, producing the stuff anymore. They're figuring out how to use corporations as cash cows for its shareholders.
And I will say that I recall well, many, many years ago, in my youth, hearing the economist Ken Galbraith set out a description, sounds very much like the managerialism you were speaking about it, that was brought together in his book, The New Industrial State, in which he talked about the sorts of changes in American capitalism that predated the neoliberal counterattack. It seems to me that it's a good description of the direction that this book seems to be talking about. I remember Noam Chomsky at the time pointing out that this sort of managerialism, as what was represented most notably by Robert McNamara in the Kennedy Defense Department, out of Ford Motor Company, where he'd begun, was actually quite parallel to the Leninist conception of managerialism practiced by the Soviet Communist Party at the time. That these were essentially similar structures that really suggested what was necessary in a modern industrial economy. And the subsequent history of those things depends upon a challenge to those notions from the point of view of value intellectuals, people who say that you can't treat people this way.
Yeah, were you alluding to what was known as technocracy in the 30s?
Yeah.
Governed by experts. Which
So,
reappeared as the end of ideology later on.
It's just, when I was in college, it was associated with Jacques Ellul, another French person, I guess. Jacques Ellul, was that the technocratic state or something? But this was the base. This is what liberalism was.
And to bring it back to the university, remember that modern student politics that arose during the Vietnam War started at the university, which had a president who had announced a new account of the university under the name Multiversity, which was managerial and incorporated with American with the American economy in the sense in the way you described.
The person you refer to, Clark Kerr, University of California, was attacked from the right in many aspects of his
for being a liberal
career before the Berkeley's free speech movement turned the tables on him.
But I think it's important, the point that David made about the rise of neoliberalism, the critique of this understanding of American economy and society is what, in a sense, the 60s were all about. The application of these forms to warfare was where it started, but it didn't stop there. And the counterattack of neoliberalism, beginning in the 70s, was occasioned precisely by the fact that this system was under severe popular critique.
Well, there's a big theme here that we might come back to sometime. I haven't finished this book. I'm just getting into it. But he seems to think that the ideology of managerialism is a relatively new thing. He talks about its emergence, and yet it's, I think, a rather old thing under a new name, which is so often the case.
That sounds right.
In these debates. But old foes with new faces. But any case, there's a longer story here about the rise and dominance of the corporation in America. Where do corporations come from? Why do they exist? Because, as you'll hear, I understand, if you go to class in corporate law in the law school, the primary purpose of the corporation is to evade personal responsibility. And you collectivize things. You are in for only the amount that you invest and not for your entire fortune or estate. This is why they're called limited liability in many places, or the société anonyme in others. It's a way of avoiding personal responsibility for your investments in business operations. Does that sound right to you?
Yeah.
There's an article in the current number of Jacobin magazine, which is always fun to read, that says liberals have spent a long time saying that in the initial arguments about the economic structure of the United States of America, there was a Jeffersonian and a Hamiltonian trend, and of course all good liberals signed up with Jefferson. The rights of man and so forth and so on. And this author argues, I think really quite persuasively, that if you examine it in the way that Ron's suggesting right now, you might end up with the notion that what Hamilton was onto was a more insightful analysis, the one that's more necessary today, if we really want to try to reconstruct the society in a way that serve the interests of people rather than the interests of money.
Yeah. Well, the corporation has certainly become the dominant institution in our society, and what this means is that schools and colleges in particular are trying to look more and more like corporations. And
not just because it's attractive.
Yeah, well, and the administrators want more and more to look like corporate executives and to have the emoluments thereunto appertaining. And is that what we're seeing being played out down the street?
Yeah, I mean, I think we're seeing we're just seeing a symptom or the fruition of this long-term process by which universities have become less funded by the state, more dependent on corporate donors, on research done jointly with corporations as corporate profit centers. We see this in South Research Park. I mean, we see the prestige. It isn't just that we see universities doing these things grudgingly or because they need the money. We see them as, we see the kind of people who rise to the top of the university structure as feeding off the prestige that they gain from, for instance, Phyllis Wise being on the Nike corporate board. So these I mean, there's so many aspects to this. I was accused this morning on the News Gazette's website comments of only caring about money, of the relationships between the university and corporations when Israel was involved, or when Jewish donors were involved, in relation to this Saleda case. And I just had to respond and say, this is part of a much larger problem with the university and the manner in which the whole society's evolved, and the university within it as a way of ultimately disciplining the students to be part of this structure of this sort of winner, in a sense, a winner-take-all kind of world.
Yeah. Exactly right. That's what the debt trap that this generation of students finds itself in is all about. There's no need for it in terms of financing the universities. There is a need for it in terms of disciplining the students, not to get those silly ideas that their parents, or God help us, grandparents had, that they should say something about national politics.
Yeah. Well, another aspect of this is the demand for efficiency in instruction, just looking at the instructional side of it. And there's more and more demand for the instructional task of the university to be carried out in a way that might be formulated by someone in industrial engineering.
Yeah, we got machines for that, don't we?
Right. Sure. And that's what it's come to. If we're going to do this rationally and with maximum efficiency, we need, first of all, metrics to find out how everyone is doing. And what does that come to, especially in the public school? testing, 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 and evaluating teachers on the basis of how well their students do on the tests.
Yeah, well, to me, it's all about, it all comes back to a famous German person making a comment about capitalism. What was it he said? Nestling in every place that it possibly could. And I think these are just the echoes of how capitalism and the capitalist ethic and the profit ethic and the measurement of time, the measurement of money, the measurement of value, the appropriation of value, all of these things which characterize how capitalism, which abstract everything, which abstract the process of learning itself, and we see, there's nothing like the philosophy department. I think if you want to get a good taste of this, there's the article about the Saleda case in this morning's paper has to do with the philosophy department,
right.
Just asking for a big punch in the mouth by saying that they have no confidence in this chancellor. And then again, I'm sorry, I'm revealing the fact that I've been spending too much time on in the comments pages, particularly in relation to this topic. But the News Gazette has actually a pretty spiffy new website in which making comments is pretty easy, and there's not even anybody moderating them, as far as I can tell.
Wow.
So that could be fun. That could be fun sometimes. But what's symptomatic of that is that when the philosophy department goes up against the chancellor, all of the aforementioned right-wing yahoos come out of the closet and start ridiculing all these thinkers, coming up, anti-Israel and coming up against the chancellor. Why don't they go back and get some teaching done and all this stuff? So one really. There's so many aspects to this with one touches, so many nerves that one touches on in terms of the reactionary mood of certain people in our culture. Admittedly, a self-selected sample who bothers to comment on the News Gazette website.
Yeah.
You're watching News from Neptune, what we have called a diplomatic revolution edition. There are, as I thought about that title, a number of diplomatic revolutions of different sorts at various levels, from the little university around the corner to the nation at large, occurred to me. The one particular that I had in mind referred to the fact that the Obama administration, even when our chief magistrate is dressed up in a new tan suit, continues to play the Sunni-Shia division in the Middle East, a division which is not finally perhaps religious at all, but nevertheless ranges two alliances against one another, with the United States sponsoring one and apparently and opposing the other. It's a mistake to talk about the Arabs versus Israel in the new left in the U.S. these days, in the Middle East, I mean. Just as it's a mistake to talk about the U.S. versus Islam in the Mideast. On the one side, we have an alliance, an effective alliance, that includes Saudi Arabia, Egypt, Qatar, Jordan, Lebanon, Israel, and the new caliphate, and perhaps even Turkey. This is the one the U.S. backs. This is the association and the effective alliance that the U.S. is behind. On the other side, we find Iran, Syria, Iraq under the present government, Hezbollah, and Hamas, with Russia and China in the background. Now, that's a brutal sketch of the alliance system in the Middle East, but it's essentially correct. What I was suggesting by a diplomatic revolution is that the Obama administration, to the dismay of various elements in the neoliberal parties, Republican and Democrat, the Obama administration is showing interesting possibilities of shifting sides, of performing a diplomatic revolution, of leaving that first group, the Sunni group that includes Saudi Arabia and Israel, and going over to the Shia group that includes Iran, and that the possible rectification of names here, actually is bound up with the U.S. provocations of Russia in Ukraine, and indeed its pivot to Asia and its provocations of China. That there is a debate going on within the American government right now, and I don't even limit that to the Obama administration, a debate to the extent to which the American interests, which are finally the interests of the 1% in controlling the world economy, might necessitate a certain change in this regard. They're worried about this in peculiar places, including the Israeli government. One of the most interesting things about the horrors that Israel has visited on Gaza is the way in which it has demonstrated fissures within the Israeli government, even as the popular move becomes increasingly fascistic. The Israeli government really doesn't know quite what to do, and one of the reasons is it's not quite sure which way the U.S. is going to jump. The idea of the U.S. backing Iran, as of course it once did for a generation, seems outrageous and impossible, but they're worried about it in Tel Aviv. Diplomatic revolutions are not out of the question. Comments, gentlemen?
Yeah, well, just so much, so fascinating, really. I mean, so awfully fascinating. In terms of, I mean, Patrick Coburn has written a book about ISIS, and which you could also buy through the aforementioned OR Press.
Yes, indeed.
In its digital form, and it sounds well worth reading. There's a couple of interviews he's done with Amy Goodman this past week, and he's basically saying that the U.S. government is just going to have to form these alliances with Iran and even Syria in an implicit or explicit way in order to deal with ISIS, because ISIS is no joke. We keep going back on this show to the famous comment by Zbigniew Brzezinski in the 1970s about when we were supporting the Mujahideen in Afghanistan to fight the Russians, about a few stirred up Muslims. Well, 40 years later, we've got more than a few stirred up Muslims, and we're still dealing with them. These particular Muslims are the consequences of our invasion and conquest of Iraq, of Afghanistan and Iraq in 2003, and hence, and our support for the opposition to Assad in Syria. And so what we have here is, according to Patrick Coburn, and he seems to know what he's talking about, as Coburns tend to know, what the Coburn family members tend more often than not to know what they're talking about, is that these people are for real. They are fanatical. They have weapons. They have strategies. They know how to organize themselves, and they're to be greatly feared. And so ultimately they're a threat to what we have tried to call stability in that region. So I think it's very apt. I mean, I had a feeling, Carl, I knew where you were going when you started with the 7 Years' War today, because I think this exactly echoes this possible realignment, this a possible new set of arrangements, as messy as it is, really does reflect the absolute the lack of principle involved here. You know, we still read in the paper as if we have enemies and friends, as if these alliances are somehow based on values. And if there's anything that people should understand is that none of this has ever been based on what we call values or democratic principles or even capitalism. I mean, well, it's capitalism, yes, but it's our version of capitalism.
I want to get you into this, Ron. I'd like to hear your views on this. But I do want to mention one thing about the Coburn family. Patrick Coburn's father, Claude Coburn, was a famous correspondent, newspaperman of the first half of the 20th century, Spanish Civil War through the Second World War and so forth, and is famous for one particular remark. He's particularly famous for one remark. Believe nothing until it's officially denied.
Right.
And that seems to me, as a summary of his experience of governments in the 20th century, a pretty good one. And I thought of that when President Obama gave his news conference yesterday and caused scandal by saying that there was no strategy yet to deal with the with Iraq with the Islamic State. Believe nothing until it's officially denied.
Yeah.
To deny that there is a strategy, has got to be the most remarkable bit of mendacity we've heard from a president who's well known for his mendacity of hope. Of course, there's a strategy. It's a strategy the U.S. has followed since the Second World War, at least in regard to the Middle East. That is the strategy that includes, as I think David mentioned, taking a leaf from Lord Palmerston in 1848. We have no eternal allies. We have no perpetual enemies. Our interests are eternal and perpetual, and those interests it is our duty to follow, close quote. That's Obama's views. That is the strategy that's very much in place, as it was for his predecessors, and those interests today are the interests of the American 1% in controlling the world economy for their benefit. That doesn't change.
Well, I don't want to be drawn into trying to predict how this is going to shake out. I'm surprised that you listed Turkey as being on one side of this ultimate ideological divide, but I'm not sure which way it's going to go, really. But the case of Iran is interesting. A number of people have said that it is, in many respects, the natural ally of the USA in the Middle East, and that is highly upsetting, that kind of talk, to some people.
Just a point about Turkey. The position of Turkey is a matter of great concern in Washington right now. First of all, because of the size and strength of the state, and also because it's not clear that it's reliable. But there is one very important datum in terms of the present alignment, and that is the fact that Turkey leaves its border open to Syria. That IS, the Caliphate, the Islamic State, exists in part because people and weapons have moved across that border. That's the only way they're getting into Syria, and a way a good number of them are getting into Iraq. It's Turkey's willingness to put up with the Islamic State, to support the Islamic State, that aligns it with that what I called the Sunni group in the earlier description.
Yeah. Well, I would hesitate to say anything about that. But, where is this headed? Is there a realignment, grand realignment going on? Essentially, pro-U.S. versus anti-U.S. And I don't know, it looks that way, certainly, sometimes, with much of Latin America starting to line up on the other side.
Yes, they're very concerned about the BRICS.
Yeah, yeah.
And I think to add a certain complexity, because it's all occurring at the same time, what's going on in Ukraine is causing our European allies, at least Angela Merkel, to draw back from NATO's ambitions for the Ukraine to join it, and to provide a somewhat dissenting voice, from what I understand, to Obama's determination. And Obama is never more self-righteous and shallow as when he's declaring what his support for Ukraine and his condemnation of Russia's alleged actions in eastern Ukraine. I mean, I don't know how much more Obama has to do to expose himself as being full of hot air, but that, I mean, he's never more full of hot air than when he talks about that. And Ukraine, it's about NATO. I mean, Turkey's a member of NATO. Mm-hmm. So all this gets very complicated. I wouldn't claim to understand, any of the subtle angles on this, but it should never, again, it should be never more obvious that this isn't about values. This just can't, unless the value is oil.
Well, I think the point is to ask what are the actual interests that are being pursued by the various players, including the United States of America. The notion that the U.S. is sort of bumbling along, sometimes doing things that it really didn't mean to do and so forth, that's helpful for the American cover story. Gee, we're sorry we're in this mess. We really didn't realize what we were getting into in Iraq. This is, of course, nonsense. The U.S., hey, these are smart guys. You know, we went to school with them. We know who they are. They're making the decisions that serve the interests that the institutions that they're in are regularly set up to serve, and that they are consistent. What the U.S. is doing in regard to the European economy and the Asian economy presents the peculiar characteristic for one who takes the long view that the U.S. essentially switched sides at the end of the Second World War after Russia had destroyed Nazism, and remember that did happen there in the Eastern Front, not in the West. After Russia destroyed Nazism and the Second World War came to an end, the U.S. immediately switched sides and joined its former enemies, Germany and Japan, to reconstruct the world, the economic world, in its own image and likeness, in the American image and likeness, that is, for the profit of the American 1%. That hasn't gone away. That's still essentially true today. The U.S. attempt to control the European economy via Germany parallels the U.S. attempt to control the Asian economy via Japan. These are the long-term policies even of the Obama administration, the Trans-Pacific Partnership and the TPIP with Europe. These things don't change. The strategy is very much in place. The question is what the U.S. is willing to do, and we're often shocked by that. How many people is the U.S. willing to kill in order to put this strategy into place? We've killed as many people in Ukraine. The U.S. is responsible for as many people being killed in eastern Ukraine as died in Gaza for that same policy.
Don't you think some of these operations have unintended consequences, as in Afghanistan?
Oh, sure. They can go wrong. But I mean, the notion that the U.S. is sort of blundering about, what was the phrase of the liberal columnists of the New York Times at the time of the liberation of Saigon in '75, that the U.S. had got into Vietnam, said, you know who I'm thinking about?
Anthony Lewis.
Anthony Lewis. Yeah. The U.S. had got into Vietnam with blundering attempts to do good.
Yeah.
Now with that he wiped out 15 years from Kennedy's invasion of South Vietnam down to 1975 as blundering attempts to do good by America. 4 million people dead perhaps in the region in those years, and they were a result of blundering attempts to do good. Now the beginning of wisdom in American politics is to see that is inadequate, that won't work, that's dead wrong.
That exonerates us. I mean,
exactly.
we just kind of backed into this.
Hey, we're just good folks, but but we have to kill a lot of people.
We're so good-hearted that we just made some mistakes.
Exactly. Mistakes were made.
Yeah.
You're watching Aware on the Air.
Deuce for Neptune.
Thank you very much. There's a mistake. There's a mistake that I made myself.
Yeah, you
used to do another program here.
Yeah.
News from Neptune.
I just wanted to make one comment about this. Another comment as we revisit the Saleta case for one last time. That he made one of his tweets that have become so infamous is he said, if Israel decides that having an ethnocracy or a theocracy is more important than Palestinian lives and Palestinian rights, then just own it already. Except in saying just own it already, he put the F word between, he put the gerund version of the F word between
How shocking.
Just and own. And
our poor student has never heard such language.
And for some reason, I've been thinking about this whole, I guess there was a sort of a psychological phrase going back to my youth about owning things, about not projecting your own problems onto other people. Mm-hmm. And there's so much about everything that we talk about in from world affairs to our own lives that have to do with projecting problems onto other people. I mean, the control of the world, the other side of the control that we talk about in terms of international politics has, of course, to do with the control of people in this country, and we see that. And so we need, maybe that's a phrase that maybe Saleda, he dates himself by using a phrase like that, but maybe it ought to be back in vogue that we should start to own things.
We have a couple of minutes left. Did you have another topic, David, that you wanted to raise?
No, I think I'm good. I wanted to mention, from going back to your reference to the 7 Years' War, I really wanted to mention, as I often do, a series of interviews that are done by Paul Jay on the Real News Network with a historian named Gerald Horne, an African-American historian who's written some interesting books that always bring the issue of slavery and Africans into all of these conflicts, including the 7 Years' War and what we call the Revolutionary War, which he refers to in relation to the slaves as a counter-revolutionary war in terms of of the colonists' desire to maintain slavery. So I would highly recommend those interviews as bringing in a different historical dimension that was new to me in a lot of ways, and I think was very, very enlightening. That's Gerald Horne with an E on the end.
Do you have a concluding comment, Ron?
I'm concerned about the university, what's happening in order to cut expenses and make more money. More and more teaching is being turned over to machines, the internet, and so on.
Adjuncts.
Yeah.
who work cheap.
Yeah, and,
who are expected to act like machines.
There have been some reactions to this piece by David Kerr in the New York Times, August 16th, and a local person, Peggy Patton, has written a letter to the News Gazette. Testing might distort education, which I think is very good, and this is a topic I think I want to return to sometime.
You've been watching News from Neptune for the 35th week of 2014, the Diplomatic Revolution edition. I'm Carl Estabrook. My discussants tonight have been David Green and Ron Szoke. Our thanks to UPTV, especially Jake, Jason, and Dan. Upcoming programs here on UPTV include Labor's Worldview, Sundays at 4 p.m., with Neptuner David Johnson at the helm, Progressive Voices, Monday from 3 to 5 p.m., and on WRFU Radio, Living Simply, first Fridays at 8 a.m., with our own Ron Szoke in the catbird seat. Inshallah, we'll be back next week for a new edition of News from Neptune. To remind you, in the words of Edward de Vere, what's past is prologue, what to come, and yours and my discharge. In the meantime, confusion to our enemies, and a good night to you.